That same day, once the night fell and all the residents of the city turned on their lights, someone approached a house on a street somewhere in Lewin. The door of this house was locked with a padlock and chains. The person reached out towards the door and activated a magical spell, causing a purple magic circle to appear. This person was none other than Saka. Within seconds, the padlock on the door shattered into pieces. Saka wore a hood, and as the door slowly opened, she simply placed her hand on her hip and remained silent. She had not come alone. By her side was Cyan, who also wore a hood. He began to look inside the house and stood still. This door connected to a secret entrance. Saka started looking at the ground and asked Cyan why he wasn't surprised to see that there was a mist base in a place like this. Instead of answering her question, he simply remained silent. Several seconds later, once the mist base door opened completely, a strong gust of wind started blowing outside. While Saka and Cyan were looking at the stairs, she revealed to him that this was the path he wanted to take. She also added that from here on out, he would be on his own. Cyan simply stood there silently, observing the stairs, and several minutes later, he entered in the mist base. Once he descended the stairs, he reached a hallway. As he walked through it, he realized that this was a unique secret realm that had been created with the power of the god of mist. This hallway was dark and filled with fog. As the fog slowly advanced towards Cyan, he thought that because of this reason, this secret realm was much larger than it appeared from the outside. While Cyan was walking down the hallway, his expression changed drastically and he became alert as he realized he wasn't alone. At that moment, someone attacked Cyan by throwing a bunch of weapons at him. Upon seeing this, he unsheathed his sword and while walking, began to swing it, blocking the attack in the process. He had been able to react in time to the attacks because he had predicted that he would be attacked. As the weapons were slowly falling to the ground, two members of Mist wearing masks appeared. They unsheathed their daggers and started advancing quickly towards Cyan. He slightly turned his head back, and upon seeing the two of them advancing rapidly towards him and ready to attack, he became somewhat confused and started wondering what kind of welcome ceremony this was. The two of them attacked Cyan, but in the blink of an eye, he gained momentum and moved away from them, causing their daggers to hit the ground. While holding Karam's sword with one hand, Cyan placed the other on the ground and stopped his body in motion. Then Cyan gained momentum and jumped. While he was in the air, he turned his body towards them and using the Karam sword, he struck the daggers that the two members of Mist had previously thrown at him. As the daggers were slowly approaching them, the member of Mist wearing a mask was surprised. Just before the daggers could hit him, he unsheathed two daggers and quickly started hitting the daggers, preventing them from impacting against him. While the daggers were slowly falling to the ground, Cyan slightly turned his head towards him, and upon seeing that he had been able to deflect his dagger in a short period of time, he was surprised. The Mist member wearing a mask began to stare at Cyan with a murderous look, and as he approached him, he activated the secret technique expansion called Death Horn Formation. At that moment, several copies of him appeared and started advancing quickly towards Cyan from all directions. While little by little the copies of him were rapidly approaching Cyan, he simply stood still without making any movement. Cyan extended his hands towards the copies and while looking at them with a murderous gaze, he activated the secret technique expansion ability, causing a powerful aura to start emerging from his body. While little by little the copies of the Mist member wearing a mask were approaching Cyan, they were left speechless to see that a child like him was capable of using this ability. Cyan activated the Bloodthirst Wave ability, causing a powerful aura to emerge from his body. This aura began to rapidly advance in all directions. As the aura of Cyan slowly approached them, they started covering their faces with their arms. Bloodthirst Wave was an exclusive secret technique of assassins. This ability allowed one to manifest the thirst for blood in a physical form to attack others. Little by little, Cyan's thirst for blood began to rise within their bodies, making it impossible for them to breathe. In a matter of seconds, 3 members of Mist passed out. Cyan turned his back on them, slightly turning his head towards them, and as he walked away, he thought that they wouldn't be able to get up for a while now. Cyan looked ahead and saw something that caught his attention. In front of him stood another member of Mist staring at him intently. Seeing that this person wasn't unconscious like the others, Cyan was surprised and started wondering if they were a higher up. Cyan began to approach him, and while he was looking down at the ground, his body started emitting a powerful mana. He unsheathed the Karam sword and as he stared fixedly at the Mist member, his eyes began to shine. Then he used the fog sword ability called Unshakable Roots of a Great Tree. Just before Cyan could make a move, the mist member gained momentum and pounced on Cyan, attacking him with a dagger. This caused him to stop using the technique, leaving him confused. Upon seeing that he had been able to stop his technique halfway, Cyan began to look at the mist member with a surprised expression and started wondering who he was. When the mist member attacked Cyan to make him stop using the technique, he lost his mask in the process. Several seconds later, his mask fell to the ground and he praised Cyan for being skilled in his main skill. This person was none other than Saka. While she was attacking Cyan using her dagger, she started looking towards the ground and with a smile explained that she couldn't hold back anymore. While Cyan was blocking her attack using the Karam sword, he simply remained silent. Upon realizing that this person was Hall Master Saka, he became somewhat confused and started wondering what was happening. With an expression full of emotion, Saka began to look at Cyan, and as she started blushing, she smiled and asked him to show her his true powers. Upon hearing this, Cyan used the technique called Thick Fog 8th Form Assault and attacked her with a burst of cuts. Just before Cyan's attack could reach her, she gained momentum and quickly moved several meters away from him. Her hair stood on end due to excitement. While holding the dagger in one hand, she placed the other in front and assumed an offensive stance. She began to stare intently at Cyan and couldn't help but smile upon seeing that he was proficient with the thick fog and the fog sword. Thinking about this, she revealed to Cyan that he was making her even more interested in him. She asked Cyan to show her all his potential. Just before she could finish speaking, Cyan turned his back on her and started running away, leaving her somewhat confused. While Cyan was fleeing, he clenched his teeth tightly and thought that the zeal for combat was what drove Saka. It didn't take him long to come to the conclusion that a master of the hall who was drunken with such desire would want to fight until one of them died. Upon seeing Cyan fleeing, Saka gained momentum and began jumping and propelling herself off the walls to catch Cyan. Upon seeing her chasing him, he was terrified. He clenched his teeth tightly, and while running away from her, he thought that this was something only those who had experienced it knew. As Saka slowly approached him, she started staring at him with an exciting gaze, and with a smile she asked Cyan to stop running. She also asked if this wasn't what he wanted. She used the fog sword technique called Rushing Fogstorm, and in the blink of an eye, she advanced towards Cyan and attacked him using the dagger. Luckily, he turned in time and managed to block the attack at the last second using the Karam sword. After blocking the attack, Cyan stepped back meters. He assumed an offensive stance, and while holding the sword with one hand, he tightly clenched his fist with the other. He began to stare at Saka and explained to her that he was not as perverted as she thought. While Saka's eyes were shining, she started looking at Cyan and asked him not to worry. She explained that this was a secret realm created by Eru, so no one outside would detect his energy. Upon hearing this, Cyan began to approach her, and while staring into her eyes, he remembered that he could use any techniques he wanted in a place like this. He adopted an offensive stance, and slowly the Karam sword began to emit a powerful evil energy. While his eyes were shining, he decided to fulfill her desire, although deep down he knew that in the process he could end up killing her. At that moment, Cyan's body started trembling, and gradually he began to fall towards the ground. Several seconds later, his body fell to the ground, and upon seeing this, Saka became somewhat confused and started wondering what was happening. While Cyan was lying on the ground, he let go of the Karam sword, and slowly an evil energy began to emanate from the sword and Karam's leg appeared. She asked Cyan to rest. While Saka was staring at Karam's leg with a surprised look, she asked her who she was. Several seconds later, Karam's body fully manifested itself. She crossed her arms, and while looking at Saka, she explained that she didn't want to intervene, but now that Cyan was exhausted, she had no other choice. She also asked Saka if she knew her. Quickly, Saka knelt before her. While she had one hand resting on her leg, she began to look towards the ground and replied that yes, she addressed her as the demonic sword, Karam. Upon hearing this, she asked Saka what was happening with this situation. She stared at Saka intently, clenched her teeth tightly, and asked why she was attacking his master if it was supposed that Saka should be worshipping Eru. With a lost gaze, Saka began to look down and explained to Karam that she was just verifying to make sure Cyan was who he had claimed to be. She also added that she didn't care if he really was the successor or not. While Karam had her arms crossed, her body started emitting a powerful energy which began advancing in all directions. She told Saka that she could have called upon her god instead of doing this. After saying this, she reached out towards the sky and, while looking at Saka with a murderous gaze, explained that if Saka wanted it so badly, then she could take it as a direct challenge. Saka lifted her head, sighed, and advised her to pay attention to the successor first. Upon hearing this, Karam became somewhat confused. Behind her was Cyan lying on the floor with a pool of blood around his face. Karam turned her head towards him, and upon seeing that he was dying, she panicked and asked her why he was dying. Saka began to stand up and with a smile explained to her that even though she had manifested in her complete form, it was a very inefficient way of doing so as it consumed all the life force of the owner. Karam grabbed Cyan by the neck and while looking at him aggressively, clenched her teeth tightly. Then she clenched her other hand into a fist and asked Cyan what was the point of drinking all that beast blood. As Saka slowly stood up, she explained to Karam that she, the Hall Master Saka Nigrithi of Mist, did not refuse any fight. While Karam was holding Cyan by the neck, she turned her head towards Saka and became somewhat confused, wondering what she was talking about. Saka stood up and began to stare at Karam with an excited look in her eyes. As she licked her lips, she couldn't help but blush. She explained to Karam that if she was her opponent, then she couldn't refuse the fight. While Karam held Cyan by the neck, she turned his head towards Saka and became terrified upon seeing her expression. She covered her mouth with her hand and wondered what the hell was wrong with her. While she was distracted, Cyan regained consciousness and asked her to let go of him. Upon hearing this, Karam released Cyan onto the ground. Then she turned her head towards him and asked if he was okay. Although Cyan had regained consciousness, he was quite tired and had dark circles under his eyes. Cyan ignored her question and asked her why she had manifested. Karam turned her body towards Saka, and while her body emitted a powerful energy, she began to stare into her eyes and with a smile, she asked Cyan to stay behind her as she was going to teach this wench a lesson. Upon hearing this, Cyan simply started looking at Saka and remained silent without making any movement. Saka unsheathed the dagger and as it was emanating a powerful energy, she assumed an offensive stance. She began to stare into Karam's eyes and with a smile, she told her that it would be an honor for her. Upon hearing this, Karam couldn't help but get a little angry. She started approaching Saka and with a smile, she asked her not to be crying and begging for her afterwards. Upon hearing this, Saka couldn't help but get excited. She also started to approach Karam and with a smile, she responded that she would love it if Karam was able to push her to that point. Both of them took on an offensive stance, and just before the battle could begin, someone gave them the order to stop. Upon hearing the voice, Saka turned her head to the side and began wondering if the voice belonged to Eru. At that moment, a portal appeared near Karam. She turned her head to the side and upon seeing the portal, she was surprised. While little by little the portal was getting bigger, Cyan started to stare at it and remained silent. Several seconds later, the portal became enormous and began to release a strong gust of wind towards the outside. Eru gave Saka the order to send the successor to the altar. Upon hearing Eru's command, Saka bowed her head towards the portal and responded with an understanding nod. While Cyan was staring fixedly at the portal, he couldn't help but smile at the thought that he would finally have the opportunity to meet Eru, the god of darkness. Eru was sitting on his throne wearing a hood, and his body was emanating a powerful and suffocating energy. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.